I'm a nutritionist by trade, so I got out of school and went straight to work in feed mills and things like that. And I found out real quick that I'm not a very good feed salesman. And the reason is because I grew up in southeast Oklahoma where you got to do everything on grass most of the time. And I'm a big believer as in we're already paying for our land, right? Whether we're renting it, whether we own it or whatever, let's maximize what it can do, all right, which is normally going to mean agronomy stuff. And then we're going to supplement to match that. And that's going to change year to year and things like that. And we'll do our nutrition exercise tomorrow where we're actually looking at that. But today we're going to talk about forage sampling and how we're going to maximize the nutrients that we get up out of the ground.
I'm originally from southwest Oklahoma, so near the Lawton area. So a little different environment as you get further east in this part of the state because of more adequate rainfall typically than I get to work with. So I work a lot with cool season wheat, rye, barley, oats, and grazing, and then also row crops. Do some with forages and working with producers and things like that. So how many in here put up your own hay? How many in here buy your own hay? Who doesn't buy any hay? Everyone have some cows or calves, cow-calf pairs, or just getting ready to get started, trying to kind of get it figured out of what all we need to do to make it all work.
The smart guys have done their homework first before they jump in.
A lot of times we got, well, I bought 30 head and I need a place to put them, type of situation. But we want to keep this pretty informal today and just kind of talk about basic things, the things that, in my opinion, saves us a lot of money, keeps us from spending a lot of money, or just some basic things that we can provide, or things basic agronomic things, and we're going to talk about those. I've worked with a lot of producers and even the area. I also farm and ranch with my dad some, and of course you get around in the coffee shops and things like that. They're always talking about how much hay that place made. Okay, how much can I make? The number one thing that I think of is, okay, what's the quality? You ever think about quality versus quantity? And so how do we get that? How do we distinguish quality versus quantity? Tell by looking at it?
Look at it, I think. There's a lot of sticks in it.
Well, you can kind of get an idea sometimes. And we're going to talk more about getting samples here. Fertility. Think about what our fertility program, think about what type of hay it is, if it's grass or blue stem. There's all these factors. What is the timing of cutting? Does that impact anything? I know that when you typically see a seed head on a plant, it's a lot taller, right? Or you can make more tonnage by having a seed head, seeing that. But what does that affect? It affects quality. Quality is generally going to be lower. So there's a fine line there at trying to get your quality and quantity matched up in your operation and system. So those are just the key things, the couple of factors in how we impact that and change that is with fertility, and then also time of harvest. Those are the kind of the key things. Now, obviously, your environment impacts it tremendously. Rain and not rain, things like that. So
when we say hay, what I really want you to hear is forages. So when we say timing of harvest, normally we're saying, oh, we're running a hay cutter. But it also could mean that's when we rotate our cows on that. We're going to maximize how much is there plus the quality that's there. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we have to hay that. All right, it's just be thinking of what is that plant doing as far as quality wise, and how does that match my animal's requirements? When do I need to be on there? When do I need to be off? Okay.
We'll discuss this a little bit more too. Show of hands, do you do your own, or do you have someone else cut and bale it maybe on a shares? Someone else do it?
Yeah.
So timing. Earl talked about getting the guy that lives a half a mile away to come and cut his on time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard to do because you're waiting on him because he's cutting others or he's cutting his own. So the timing of that impacts our quality. So just a few things. We'll talk about testing here in a little bit, but who does soil testing? Anyone get any soil tests and kind of see why do we get a soil test?
See what it needs.
See what it needs. I get phone calls a lot from producers that say, hey, I'm going to put this on, how much should I put fertilizer on this? I'm like, well, I don't have any clue what you're putting on, how much it needs, what's your soil residual nitrogen, what's your P and K. We got to get a soil test in order to have a base foundation that we can apply the nutrients that need to be instead of over applying or applying things that we don't need out there. So getting a soil test is to me is a key thing as far as being able to grow forage and knowing how much we're going to need, how much is that. It's about saving dollars because it takes a lot of money to do all this. It takes a lot of money to keep a cow going year round. But we're trying to cut costs and be the most efficient as we can. Getting a good soil sample and kind of seeing what we have out there for that pasture, that field is a big step. N, P, and K, so when I talk about N, P, and K, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the key things to plant growth. When we talk about forages, if we have one that's limiting over the other, then we're going to see that far as impacting our yields and not achieving our yield goals. Water is also a huge component. If we're limiting on water, we're only going to make so much forage. Correct? Everybody agree? Yeah. If we're limited on nitrogen, we're only going to make X amount of forage. So when we think about potassium and phosphorus, I look at it as the potassium and phosphorus is like the engine oil in a pickup or tractor. You can run them a little low for a while and everything's okay, but sooner or later you got to start adding back to that or change the oil and fill it full again. Because we go too low, then we're not going to make much forage at all. Nitrogen, look at that as fuel. When you run out of fuel, it stops. So you got to have the nitrogen there in order to make everything work as well. So nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium all work together within that plant system. Also, soil pH is another huge thing that I look at on every soil sample. The first thing is what's my soil pH? To be able to determine, okay, if I've got a low soil pH, then I know that I'm going to be limited on how much forage I can make off of that.
Yep. So through this camp, you'll hear us talking about fertility, and most of the time we're going to be talking about nitrogen, all right? Assuming that you've already met your P and K. So think of your P and K, your phosphorus and potassium, as that's what keeps the plants healthy and thriving. Your nitrogen is your production, all right? So when we go through our exercises and stuff later on in the camp, on the stuff, and we talk about fertility, a lot of times we're just talking about just supplying nitrogen because it's always recommended to meet your P and K, all right? You don't know that unless you spent $10 and done a soil sample, that you met that. It's just like your minerals nutrition in your animals. If you had a bucket, slatted bucket, the lowest slat lets all the water out, right? So if I'm low in one, I'll never reach the potential of the others. So if I'm low in phosphorus and my nitrogen and potassium's up here, it doesn't matter. I'm already limited. I need to raise it up to make sure that bucket fills all the way up and all of them are working as efficiently as they can. All right? So when we're talking about that and we talk about native stands, we don't normally recommend fertilizing native grasses. But what that means is we're assuming that you've already met your potassium and your phosphorus, because we want you to meet those to keep those plants healthy and thriving the best that they can, and then we're going to add nitrogen to it, okay?
So native grasses, being native, they can only produce so much, regardless how much fertility you put on. They're only going to produce so much because they are designed to be native across the state and to produce each year given the environment they have. When we think of Bermuda grass, it's a little different story. That's more of a racehorse grass or forage because it's designed to make a lot of forage quick. Granted, the fertility and everything is there. So typically a ton of Bermuda grass, a ton of forage, takes 50 pounds of nitrogen to do that. That's actual pounds of nitrogen. So how many pounds of nitrogen is in 100 pounds of 4600 urea? Should be 46 pounds. So just because you're putting on 100 pounds or say 50 pounds of product doesn't mean we got to look at actual pounds of nitrogen per product. Does that make sense? So it's 100 pounds, 100 units, or 100 pounds of 4600 is 46 pounds of nitrogen, actual nitrogen that you're getting on. So I want to kind of keep that clear because sometimes that gets confusing.
We're talking about pounds of nitrogen, not pounds of product. Okay? So
Yeah.
that's what, 106 pounds of urea for 50 pounds of nitrogen.
Right. So keeping that straight and knowing your forms and your sources of what you're putting down. That's key at keeping and maintaining that forage pasture and things throughout the growing season. When we think of blue stem or native hay, those are a little more, they don't require as much nitrogen as Earl said, but the P and the K has to be maintained or we start seeing other plant species coming in that we've never seen before. One might be broom sedge, a blue stem. The other might be what I started seeing a lot, wiregrass, ticklegrass, prairie 3-on. Cattle don't really care to graze it much at all. And so we start to see other species coming in that's not really, that's very undesirable that's out there.
So what you're saying is if your P and K are low, you give more of a chance to get some stuff in there you don't want. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
You got potential. Because Mother Nature's always trying to cover herself with something. You gotta keep that in mind. You take something out and you've got a bare spot, she's trying to have something to cover her up. So it can change species, the diversity out there in your field.
So if we're limited in our P and K, we can see those desirables start to go away over time because our stand starts diminishing and the things that we don't want start to come up. Because weeds will always take advantage of those nutrients. Okay, and we haven't really talked about this, and I think you will on day 3 as far as weed management and stuff. But those weeds are stealing nutrients from the plants that you want to grow. All right, so again, if that Bermuda grass stand or that native stand starts to go away, Mother Nature, like you said, she don't like to be naked, so she's going to start covering up with something, and it's going to be stuff that we probably don't want. So a couple of years ago, we had an explosion of broom sedge, but what that was the year had set up to give advantage to that weed. Our Bermuda grass came slow, and that broom sedge jumped up above it. If the conditions are right, and no matter whether you fertilize or not, you got broom sedge that year, okay? If the conditions are right, and we fertilize the ones that we want timely, right? That timing of fertilizer, just like your timing of harvest, then we can promote that to jump above it, and it's going to smother out. And so whatever gets up above is going to smother what's down below. And so
the question is that I get, and I've had producers that it was low. Some of these grasses are indicator grasses. They indicate that they're potentially low on phosphorus. So you go and you get a soil sample and say, yeah, I'm low on phosphorus. So we put some down And I've had producers say, I put some down and I'm not seeing any results yet. But they were still grazing. They didn't allow a period of rest. It takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. It took it a while to get in the shape it's in, so it takes it a while to kind of straighten that back out. And that's some of the things that we just have to work with and let Mother Nature do her work as well. So, you agree on that?
I agree.
I got a question. When you say broom sedge, you're talking about sage, right? Is that the same thing or no?
No, broom sedge, blue stem. You're thinking of sage, brush sage.
Maybe like the white.
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay, that's what we're talking about.
No. This would be. It kind of resembles a blue stem, but it's more of a. It looks like a broom.
Yeah, it's a golden color. Puts out a white flower certain times a year, or when it puts out seeds. Cattle won't eat it. You can bale it, and they won't eat it. It does not taste good at all. They'll eat it when it's this big, but once it starts growing up, and most people will look at it and go, "Oh, look at that native grass." It's native, but it's undesirable. Okay.
So typically, when we graze blue stems, and we like to kind of initiate that grazing around 12 to 18 inches, and we like for them to try to graze, no more than 3 or 4 inches off the surface. So we want to leave some room there to allow that plant to compensate and come back. So if we nub that down to the ground, it takes longer for that to come back. So that 3 or 4 inches is what we like to leave in more of a native blue stem pasture. When we think about Bermuda grass, a little different scenario. We like to leave 2 or 3 inches out there, and we initiate that grazing at 4 to 5 inches. So, and that depends on growing conditions and things like that we're using. But we can nub it down to the ground, and it takes a while for that to come back. So you have to be able to make sure you have a rest period in there in order to get those forages back going again like you want. Anything to add on that?
No, it's just kind of the same way as that guy that comes and cuts your hay. If he scalps that Bermuda grass field, it takes a while for it to come back because there's not enough leaf matter there to start absorbing the sun and start photosynthesis. Native grass, you'll want to leave that about 4 to 6 inches because again, the way that plant is built, you need enough leaf matter to where it can grow out, okay? It will go grow out if you cut it down. It just takes longer for that plant to revive. Yes, sir? Yes, sir.
What do you recommend to control Johnson?
To control Johnson grass, heavy grazing. There's certain if it's growing up fast, cattle love it, and they'll run out there and they'll graze it so much you can do away with it. But what we try to do is a lot of people get it because they're worried about nitrates and things like that. Johnson grass is a great grass. You need to manage it correctly. As far as weed control, he can talk to you, but you're talking about basically glyphosate in a wicker bar.
You've also got some options of a product called Outrider in Bermuda grass. It's used to be some wheat herbicide, but it does really good job on Johnson grass. Now it's expensive, but we do have producers running on some hay meadows and things where they're starting to run some glyphosate after they cut and bale that. They'll run us 8 ounces an acre of Roundup across it to try to get sandbur control and Johnson grass control. But grazing it,
Glyphosate, Roundup.
But Outrider is a product that works really well on Bermuda grass as far as Johnson grass control. It does a good job.
Until your Bermuda's dormant and you put on the Roundup?
No, you would actually, because when
You
you're...
want that Johnson grass growing. So that's why I said in a wicker bar. If it's a thick patch, you could spray it, but normally we've got a patch here and a patch over here, so we're talking, drive over it with a wicker bar and it'll kill it. Yeah.
Yep.
Most of the people in a pasture grazing situation, like I love clovers, But normally we're also having to control ragweed and a bunch of broadleaves, and that hinders that clover production.
As far as spraying, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as managing my weeds, I mean, the perfect system is you'd have Bermuda grass and clover mixed in, but it's just hard to manage that at times. I've seen people do it and they do it successfully, but they don't wait till they have a weed problem to address it. They're literally with spot sprayer.
Does anyone here know how to pull a good forage sample? Anyone ever pulled one before?
I mean, I did.
So who feeds hay here? Everybody, right? We're never going to get away from that. We'll always have to feed because it's going to snow and we're going to have bad conditions. And it's really hard to get 365 days of grazing with the forages and stuff that we have. We normally don't have enough cool season. You might up there in Veneta and things like that to get us through winter without having some sort of hay.
Right.
And I will tell you, this hay will fluctuate every year. I test my place every year when hay comes off, and the best it was about 9.4, and the worst it was 6.2 on protein. Energy's always been pretty consistent with it. However, the protein, that 3% difference is a huge difference when it comes to supplementation. All right? So if I went and I tested it the first year and I said, well, it tested 9% and it looked good. The next year, and if I said, well, it looked about the same as it did last year, right? I'm probably going to short my cows a lot of nutrients because it was 9% the first year and then it drops. So I don't know unless I have a forage analysis on that.
Well, why does that change? Why does that change? Growing season is different.
When we cut it is
When we cut it, may be different.
because I've got to wait on that guy to come bale it, right? And so the earliest we've cut it is in late June, and the latest we cut it last year was the end of August. So that's a big difference on, and then every year spring comes at a different time, and summer, everything's different, all right? And if I had two different pastures, that means I'd need to sample both of them because the hay off of this pasture is going to be different than the hay off of that
Talk
pasture.
about testing the hay when you get it. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Or even before you buy it. Sometimes.
Okay.
I mean, you can ask the producer to say, hey, can you provide me with a forage analysis on this before we don't see that a lot.
No.
But you can ask for it.
But I guarantee you that dairy down there, they do. Because they don't buy hay by the bale. They buy it by the ton. And they'll know exactly what this alfalfa tests before they'll ever feed it. Because that's important to them, right? It's important to us. It's just normally beef cows, it doesn't matter if they fluctuate because we don't know if their milk production went down one day. There's a chart in there, but for like Bermuda grass, we're talking 4 to 6 weeks after or once it starts coming up, or 4 to 6 weeks from when you harvested it before. So Bermuda grass, we can get several cuttings off of it, right, for fertilizing, right? That maximum, that bell curve of quality and quantity is about 4 to 6 weeks in there. So that's when you kind of want to hit that. But my problem is, again, I can't get that guy scheduled to come out here. I can't get him there for a second cutting, right? And the problem with him is he gets paid per bale. So when he comes out there, he's going to say, there's really not enough here yet to come bale it.
So what can you look for? What can you look for if you're buying hay? To just some indicators. I mean, obviously you cannot tell what the protein is on this by looking at it. But if you see a seed head, or if you kind of look at the edges of it, and you're like, man, there's a lot of, looks like it's real mature. A light should go off in your head saying, okay, this probably wasn't, what kind of other hay do you have for sale? Or maybe let me look at your other cutting and just, kind of look at it. You can tell by the fine stem, you can tell by the seed head, you can kind of peel back and look kind of in there a little maybe. On a round bale, it's hard. You can kind of flip that top up, but it only gives you, you can only see about that much. So that gets to be kind of just kind of looking at it and seeing what clues you can look at. But far as testing, this is a hay forage probe, and there's different ones out there. There's ones that that will go into, put into a drill, and use a drill far as drilling into that hay bale or that using that probe. You also got the hand crank probes. I like these. This is pretty simple. Everything that we push through this is going to end up in this PVC. The county extension offices should have a couple of these around, and you can go get it and pull your samples and then return it back and then turn in your forage to be sent off, which I think's $14.
$14.
To send that off and then to do that. And so pretty not very expensive for what information that you're going to be feeding your herd with, as far as your, it's pretty significant. So right here are mid-size square bales, what I call the mid-size, the 3x3x8s. It's generally 1,000 pound. You've got the 4x4x8s, which is the 2,000 pounds or the ton. You've got small squares, you've got round bales, you got 4x5s, you got 5x5s, you got 5x6s, you got 4x6s. All different types of hay bales out there. And the main thing with the square bale is that we try to take a representative sample of that bale. We can't get into the center, right? And if we were going to take this, we would want to go through the end of the bale like this. Because as that bale is being baled up, that windrow, we're taking more of a representative area of the windrow versus doing it like this. You're just getting one spot. So you're getting a better representative sample by doing it this way.
You're covering more of the field in one probe.
Yes.
Okay.
So large square bales, 2 samples, 1 on each end. Round bales, 1 to 3, depending on how many bales you've got out there in that field. Take 1 on one end, and like a round bale, we don't want to stick it in the center. You want to be able to stick it in the side. Earl likes to go up like this, right?
Yeah.
So that the water will shed off of that. If you go down inside on the side of the round bale, then that water can kind of come back into that hole. So just taking those samples, you want to make sure that you're getting, a good representative sample by doing that. Does that make sense, everyone?
And if your bales are baled really, really tight, you're probably not going to bury that thing all the way up. So if I only bury that thing up this far, that means I need to take more representative samples, okay? So we recommend for big bales, squares or rounds, 10 cores for a good representative sample. But again, if I had 100 bales sitting here, I want to make sure that I'm spreading those 10 cores out. Nothing to say you can't do a lot more than 10 and put them all in a bucket,
So you're
okay?
gonna put it in that bag, you're gonna get cores from several bales throughout the whole field, put them all in the same bag, is that what you're saying?
What I always do is I have a good clean bucket and I'll just start dumping them in it. And then once I get to the house, I stir everything up, okay? And then I shove it in that bag.
But if you've got multiple fields and multiple hay meadows and you're in a hurry and, as long as you got a clean bucket, go out there and stab some and then, pour it into your bag, mark it, make sure, and then you go to the next one. You can kind of make sure it's mixed up well and then go to the next one. It's just keeping track of it. I've seen instances where we cut half the field and then that night it rained on it and we didn't cut the other half till the next day. Well, well, this has been rained on. Well,
Yeah.
It's keeping track of your quality. So these work pretty good. You kind of take you a couple stabs at it. They don't always work that easy. You don't always get that in there that far. But you can look.
You didn't empty
I didn't get much, did I?
it. You didn't empty it. Here.
Got
First you gotta know how to work these things.
Looky there. But sometimes it comes out. You can see your sample there is what you send in.
So you're wanting to send a sample in just like that, fill this bag up, okay? When we send it to our lab, they throw that in a dryer after they weigh it. That way they can figure out how much moisture was in there, get that sample completely dry, and then they grind it up to a fine, fine powder. All right? And out of this big old bag that you just took that represented 100 bales, they're going to take about a half of a teaspoon. And that sample represents that 100 bales. So the better sample you take to represent your hay, the better sample we're going to get and the more accurate we are. If we sit here and we only sample the good ones, right? Or if we only sample the hay off of that good part of the field, it's not going to represent, and then you call me and say, hey, what do I need to supplement? We work through that. When you get to the other hay at the end that maybe not quite as good, it might be a total different supplementation program, okay? So the better the sample you can take, just like your soil samples, the more diversified and to represent what you have, the better we are at assessing what you need. So then it comes into hay storage. We've only got a few more minutes here. So how many have a hay barn like this? How many wish they had a hay barn like this? It ain't pretty, it ain't clean, but I'd take it, okay? If we left that hay right there for 10 years, what's it gonna be in 10 years? It's gonna be just like that. So the amount of money you saved on nutrients versus, say these were round bales and you stored them outside, what's that round bale gonna look like in 3 years? You ain't gonna be able to pick it up, right? And so the amount of money that we can save on waste by having it in a barn, it's not really gonna decrease in value at all, okay? So I have hay in my barn that was there for 4 years, and just for grins, I took a sample of it and it tested the same way it did 4 years ago, okay? So again, if we leave that hay there for 10 years, we can still feed that. So how great would it be to have a barn to where we can put enough hay in it to last us a year and never have to get into that barn? And then all of a sudden we hit a drought and I've got a whole barn full of hay that's going to be the same quality as it was the day I put it in there. If we store it outside, we see a lot of people take hay right off the field and move it straight to the fence line. That's not a bad idea either. However, normally that fence line is also a drip line for the trees. Okay? We feel good because maybe we feel like it's getting under that tree. But however, there's a lot of moisture that falls from that tree on that bale. And now, because it's under the tree, no wind can get in there to dry it out.
Shaded.
Right? So making sure you got a good spot for that drains real well. Leave space between those bales. You can butt them end to end, but don't bring them side to side on round bales. Square bales like this, if you store them outside, they have to be covered and preferably off the ground, right? Or any square bales. So that storage outside, what we'll see over time is just the waste. So it shows in your book, there's a little chart there that if you had a 6 foot tall bale and 4 inches of waste, right? So that 6 foot tall is going to be here. And you walk up there and there's 4 inches of just waste. How much is that of the bale? 21%. Right? So a fifth of your bale is in that outer 4 inches. So if it already looks bad there, your cows probably are most likely not going to eat that. If you had 6 inches, that's 30-something%. All right? Or yeah, probably 50%. I didn't look at that. Yeah. So that's just money. If it cost me $20 a bale to have that guy bale it, not mention what I put in fertilizer, don't have anything else on the place, right? Just that 20 bucks. Now I've got to add another 20% due to waste because it's set there for 18 months or whatever. Then the next step is when I feed it, what waste do I have when I feed it? How many of y'all have the old, what I call FFA shop style feeders, hay feeders? It's just a metal ring welded up back in the day, right? What we see with those, anything that has an open bottom, those poly type rings and those, we see about a 20% waste on it. If you buy a round bale feeder that had a skirt on the bottom, we see about a 12% waste. But if we see a modified cone, something that sets the bale off the ground and is skirted, we can reduce that down to 5%. Okay? So imagine what that animal's doing. It's her behavior. She reaches in there, grabs a bite, and normally she'll step back. Well, everything she pulls out of her mouth is going to fall. and then she's going to step on it, she's going to defecate on it, calves are going to lay on it, she's not going to eat anymore. So we have $20 plus 20% waste of the outside because of storage, and now 20% waste of we're feeding it. What did that $20 a bale just cost me? Quite a bit. All right. So trying to minimize that loss. Those bale feeders that have the cones, they're expensive, anywhere $600 to $800. But I'm saving 15% waste, and I don't know what hay costs up. You're in Veneta. What's hay cost up there right now?
35 to 45.
If I could buy it at 35, I'd buy it all day long. I live at Uligal. Yeah, yeah.
It's 130.
Whoa.
So, and in the beef industry, we buy it in the bale, don't we? That dairy down there, they buy it in a ton. But we normally buy it in a bale. And just like Heath said, that bale is going to be different sizes. It's going to be different densities. Because if I'm coming to your place to bale your hay, am I going to pack that thing as tight as I can? No, because I get paid per bale. I'm going to do it just enough to where you're not mad at me. Right? So on all of this, I don't know if it's this group or whatever, you're managing your cost is what you're doing, okay? Of your total cost in cow-calf production, how much is feed? I know you know it, JJ. About 40 to 50%, okay? And when I take my calves to the sale barn, can I get more money than what someone's willing to pay for them? It's a bidding war between two people. Hopefully there's two people bidding, right? If not, I can't get any more for that. So my income is kind of set to what the markets are. So what does that tell me? I need to manage my cost. If I want to make more money, I need to manage cost. If I'm managing cost and 40% of it comes from feed, that tells me that's where I can make my most improvement. By doing a soils test, I can improve the quality and quantity of what's coming up. And then by doing a forage test, now I can totally be specialized into what supplement best fits that forage and how to use it wisely. It could be I've got 3 different types of hay and all of them are different ranges of quality, and I'm going to take the best one while they're lactating, and then as they go through mid-gestation, I'm going to use the worst one. A strategic plan of feeding that forage, okay? That $10 there, the $14 for a forage sample, we can save you thousands of dollars. But we don't know that unless that's done specific to your operation.